All right, let's jump into a deep dive on Bertrand Russell.
Sounds good to me.
I'm hearing you want to know more about him, and we're going to be using excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on him to guide our conversation today.
Perfect.
It sounds like he was a pretty influential figure in 20th century thought.
That's an understatement.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, Russell's influence goes way beyond just academia.
Interesting.
He was very much a public intellectual who wasn't afraid to engage with, the issues of the day.
I see.
And as a result, he earned a Nobel Prize in literature.
Wow.
But he also ended up facing imprisonment for his convictions.
Oh, wow. A Nobel Prize and jail time.
Yeah,
So he was brilliant, but also controversial.
definitely.
I'm intrigued. Where do we even begin with such a complex figure?
Well, I think Russell himself gives us a good place to start.
Okay.
In his autobiography, he says that his life was driven by three main passions:
Okay.
love, knowledge, and a profound pity for human suffering.
Those are some pretty powerful motivators.
Right.
Yeah. Do you think that any one of those passions had a greater influence on his work than the others?
That's tough to say for sure.
Yeah.
But I do think all three of those passions are kind of woven together throughout his life and his work.
I see.
If you look at his pursuit of knowledge, it led him to some groundbreaking discoveries in logic and philosophy.
Okay.
And his love for humanity fueled his really passionate activism for peace and social justice.
Mm-hmm.
And then his profound pity for human suffering. I think that motivated him to challenge traditional morality and look for ways to kind of ease the world's pain.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how those passions connect the different parts of his life.
Right.
But before we get into his activism and social impact,
Sure.
I'm a little curious about the foundation of his thinking,
Okay.
his work in logic and analytic philosophy.
Right.
Because, to be honest, logic can sound a bit dry and intimidating to someone like me.
Yeah, I can see that.
So, can you maybe help me understand why it matters,
Absolutely.
even for someone who's not like a mathematician or a philosopher?
Yeah, Russell's work in logic wasn't just about like abstract symbols and formulas.
Yep.
He was really trying to develop a clearer way to think, a clearer way to analyze language, and ultimately a way to really understand the world around us.
I see.
And, the tools that he developed, they had a huge impact not just on philosophy, but on fields like math and computer science.
So it's like he's creating like a new mental operating system,
Totally.
like a more rigorous and precise way of thinking.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And one of the most ambitious projects he ever worked on was something called logicism.
Logicism, okay, I'm sensing a theme here.
Yeah, right.
Can you explain what that is?
So logicism is basically the idea that mathematics at its core can be reduced to logic.
Okay.
So just imagine trying to prove that all the complexities of math, from basic arithmetic to like advanced calculus, can be built up from this small set of logical principles.
Right.
That's what Russell and his collaborator Alfred North Whitehead set out to do in this massive book called Principia Mathematica.
Principia Mathematica, that's the one that's so dense even Einstein supposedly struggled with it.
That's the one. Yeah, it's infamous for its complexity.
Okay.
But it's important to understand that Russell and Whitehead weren't just like playing a game with symbols.
Okay.
They were trying to show that like the very foundation of all mathematical truth is pure logic.
Right.
So you can think of them like intellectual architects searching for the most basic building blocks of math.
So even if they didn't totally succeed, it sounds like they laid a new foundation for math that had a ripple effect on the 20th century.
Exactly. It was a radical project and a very influential undertaking, even if the full logicist program didn't really pan out the way they'd hoped.
That's pretty impressive, but now I'm also kind of curious about a different side of Russell,
Yeah.
the one that landed him in jail.
Right.
Because I'm guessing his very logic-driven mind didn't shy away from applying those principles to real-world problems,
You're absolutely right.
which probably ruffled some feathers.
He definitely ruffled some feathers.
He wasn't content to just stay in the ivory tower.
Not at all. He firmly believed in bringing philosophical thinking to bear on social and political issues.
Yeah.
And, that often led to conflict.
It sounds like he was dismissed from some pretty prestigious academic positions.
He was. He was fired not once, but twice. First from Trinity College, Cambridge,
Wow.
and then later from City College, New York.
And wasn't he also imprisoned during World War I for his pacifist views?
That's right. Yeah, he spent time in prison for speaking out against the war.
It takes a certain kind of courage to stand by your convictions, especially when they go against the mainstream.
He was a man of principle.
It sounds like he wasn't just theorizing about logic and ethics, he was actually living them,
He was.
even when it meant facing some pretty serious consequences.
Exactly. For Russell, clear thinking and courageous action went hand in hand.
It sounds like he was a true rebel with a cause.
He was. He was a rebel with many causes,
Oh,
actually.
really? So let's dig into some of those causes.
Sounds good.
I mean, pacifism must have been a big one, especially considering the really tumultuous times he lived through.
Oh, absolutely. Russell was a staunch pacifist his entire life.
Okay.
And his opposition to both world wars was completely unwavering, even when it meant fines, dismissals, imprisonment, you name it.
I can only imagine the social pressure he must have faced.
It was immense.
Yeah, for holding such a strong stance during those times.
Yeah, but he never backed down.
Wow. Can you tell me a little bit more about how his pacifism kind of manifested in his life?
Sure, so for Russell, pacifism wasn't just about opposing specific wars.
Okay.
It was really tied to this deeper commitment to reason and nonviolence.
I see.
And he believed those were the foundations for a just and peaceful world.
So it's like a deeply held principle.
Exactly. It wasn't just like a political position for him.
Gotcha.
And, his anti-war activism, it went way beyond just protests and demonstrations.
Really? Like, what else did he do?
Well, later in his life, he became a very prominent voice in the movement for nuclear disarmament.
Oh, what?
And he even co-authored this really important document called the Russell-Einstein Manifesto.
Ah, the Russell-Einstein Manifesto. That was like a pivotal document in raising awareness about the dangers of nuclear weapons, right?
Absolutely. It was a watershed moment.
Imagine a world on the brink of nuclear annihilation,
Right.
like grappling with this unprecedented destructive power of these new weapons.
Right. And this manifesto was co-signed by some of the greatest minds of that time,
Okay.
and it really brought the issue of nuclear war to the forefront of the global consciousness.
That's incredible to see how Russell, a logician and philosopher, played such a significant role in shaping that whole conversation around nuclear weapons.
It's really remarkable.
What else did he do on that front?
He was also really key in the Pugwash conferences,
Okay.
which brought together scientists and thinkers from both sides of the Iron Curtain to talk about the urgent need for nuclear disarmament.
So he was really putting his, I guess, logical mind and international influence to work
He
on one of the most pressing existential threats that humanity has ever faced.
Exactly. I mean, Russell believed that the unprecedented threat of nuclear war required a new way of thinking.
Okay.
A global approach to problem solving based on reason and dialogue, not on ideological conflicts that had fueled past wars.
It sounds like Russell wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo,
He wasn't.
even on some really sensitive issues.
He was a fearless critic of the status quo.
I mean, was his pacifism and anti-nuclear activism the only area where he kind of ruffled feathers?
Oh, not at all. His views on religion and traditional morality also caused a huge amount of controversy.
I bet, especially back then.
Yeah, especially in the more conservative circles of his day.
That's what I'm hearing. I'm kind of ready to dive into that side of Russell.
Sure.
How did his views on religion differ from the mainstream?
Well, Russell was a very outspoken atheist.
Okay.
He didn't shy away from criticizing religion at all.
Right.
And he even had a very famous public debate with a Jesuit priest about the existence of God.
Oh, wow. That must have been quite the spectacle.
It was.
What was his main argument against religion?
Well, Russell's atheism was more nuanced than just denying the existence of God.
Okay.
He argued that religious belief often got in the way of intellectual progress, and sometimes even promoted harmful moral values.
So he saw blind faith as a danger to both intellectual and moral development?
He did.
That's a pretty bold stance to take, especially back then.
It was definitely controversial.
Yeah.
But he believed that unquestioning adherence to dogma really stifled critical thinking.
Okay.
And he felt it could even be used to justify all sorts of injustices.
Could you give me like a specific example of a moral value that he challenged?
Sure, one of the biggest areas was his critique of traditional sexual morality.
Okay.
He advocated for sex education for young people.
Wow, that's pretty progressive for the early 20th century.
It was very progressive.
Yeah.
And he thought that society's prudish attitudes towards sex were not only harmful but also hypocritical.
Okay, so he was challenging a lot of social norms back then.
He was...
Wait, did he challenge anything else besides traditional sexual morality?
Oh, yeah. His views on marriage were also very progressive for his time.
Okay.
He believed that marriage should be based on love and companionship, not on a rigid lifelong contract.
Right, not just like a social obligation.
Right, exactly.
It seems like his challenges to these different aspects of the status quo were all connected by a deeper theme.
I think you're right.
Was there like an underlying principle that was motivating all of his activism and his criticism of traditional ways of thinking?
Yes, there was. At the heart of Russell's thinking was this deep concern about power.
Power, okay.
He believed that unequal power dynamics were the root cause of so many social and political problems,
I see.
like war, poverty, injustice, individual suffering, you name it.
So it sounds like his activism, his criticisms of religion and traditional morality we're all part of this effort to challenge existing power structures
That's a great way to put it.
and to create like a more just and equitable world.
Exactly. For Russell, philosophy wasn't just this abstract intellectual game.
Okay.
It was a tool for understanding and for changing the world for the better.
This is so fascinating. I mean, we've covered so much ground already.
We have.
Logicism, foundations of mathematics, pacifism, atheism, critiques of traditional morality.
And there's more.
It's like we're getting this glimpse into the mind of a true intellectual revolutionary.
He was a revolutionary thinker.
Yeah, but I can tell that there's still so much more to explore.
There is.
What other aspects of Russell's thinking should we kind of dive into next?
Well, we've talked a lot about Russell's outward actions and his critiques of systems.
Right.
But to really get the depth of his philosophy, I think we need to look at how he approached the nature of knowledge itself
Okay.
and even existence itself.
All right, lead the way. I'm ready for more.
So one of the most fundamental questions that Russell really grappled with was this classic problem of the external world.
Okay. I have to admit that sounds a little intimidating.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for me?
Sure.
For those of us who haven't spent years in philosophy classes.
Absolutely. So it basically boils down to this. How can we be sure that our perceptions actually line up with a real world outside of our minds?
Okay.
How do we know we're not just brains and vats being tricked into thinking that there's an external reality?
That's a really unsettling thought.
It is. It's kind of a mind-bending question.
It's like straight out of a science fiction movie.
Exactly.
So how did Russell even begin to tackle such a huge question?
Well, he approached it with his signature blend of logic and analysis.
Okay.
He started by making a distinction between two types of knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description.
Two types of knowledge. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Okay, so think of knowledge by acquaintance as the most direct and immediate type of knowledge we can have.
Okay.
It's about being directly aware of something.
Okay.
Like the sensation of red when you see an apple.
Right.
It's not about knowing facts about the apple.
I see.
Like its scientific name or its nutritional value or whatever. It's really about that pure, unfiltered experience of seeing that specific shade of red.
Got it. So it's kind of like a gut feeling,
Yeah.
a primal experience.
Yeah, like something that's hard to really put into words.
Exactly. Okay.
And then you contrast that with knowledge by description.
Okay.
That's the kind of knowledge we get indirectly
Okay.
through things like language and concepts and reasoning.
Gotcha.
It's about knowing facts about things rather than directly experiencing them.
Okay.
So, for example, you know that the Earth is round,
Right.
even though you haven't personally flown around it and seen the curvature for yourself.
Right. I've seen pictures and I've learned about it in school,
Exactly.
but I haven't directly experienced the roundness.
Right. So you have knowledge by description of the Earth's roundness,
Okay, I see.
but you have knowledge by acquaintance of that apple's redness.
I got it.
Okay, so how does this all relate to the problem of the external world?
Yeah, how do we get from these raw sensations to a belief in a solid world out there?
Well, Russell thought the key was to start with what we can be most certain of,
Okay,
which is those direct, immediate experiences we have by acquaintance.
gotcha.
So from that foundation of certainty,
Right.
we can then use logic to build up a coherent picture of the world.
So it's like building a house.
Yeah.
You start with a strong foundation of those direct experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and then you use logic as the framework to build up a more complex structure of understanding on top of it.
That is a perfect analogy, and Russell believed that the building blocks of the structure were things he called sense data.
Sense data. Okay, now I'm curious.
Yeah.
What are those exactly?
Okay, so think of sense data as the raw material of our perception,
Okay,
the very basic units of experience.
okay,
So these are things like colors and shapes and sounds and smells,
right.
the immediate qualities of what we experience.
Okay,
And the idea is that we can be absolutely certain of these sense data even if we're not sure about the nature of the physical world that's causing them.
so I might not know, what's causing that sensation of blue when I look at the sky.
Right.
But I can be certain that I'm experiencing that blueness.
Exactly.
Okay, so from this foundation of sense data,
Yeah.
Russell believed that we could logically construct our concept of physical objects
Mm-hmm.
and even the whole external world.
Yes, he was essentially trying to rebuild our understanding of reality,
Wow.
starting from those most basic elements of
It's
experience.
pretty mind-blowing.
It is. It's a very ambitious undertaking.
I'm starting to see how it all kind of fits together.
Yeah,
We ground our knowledge in the certainty of our sense data,
right.
and then we use a logic to build up more complex ideas,
Mm-hmm.
like physical objects and the external world.
Precisely. But did Russell's approach totally solve the problem of the external world?
Yeah, are there still unanswered questions?
Well, that's a question that philosophers are still debating to this day.
I bet.
It's a very tricky problem.
Yeah,
While Russell's theory was really groundbreaking and influential.
right.
It wasn't without its critics.
I can imagine it's a pretty radical idea
It
to kind of
is.
reduce the world down to these, like, basic units of experience
Right.
and then rebuild it using logic.
Yeah, it's a very bold approach.
What kind of criticisms did his theory face?
Well, some philosophers argued that it oversimplifies our experience,
Okay,
that it doesn't fully capture like the richness and complexity of what it's actually like to experience the world,
right.
and others questioned whether logic alone is enough to bridge the gap between those sense data and our beliefs about physical objects.
So even Russell, with all of his powerful logic, he couldn't silence all of the skeptics.
Even the greatest minds can't fully resolve every philosophical problem.
Right, okay,
But, the fact that we're still talking about Russell's ideas today
right.
really shows how influential his work was.
I agree.
And his work on the problem of the external world was a major contribution to the field,
Hmm.
even if it didn't provide like a definitive solution.
Yeah, it's really impressive how he was able to apply his logical thinking to these big fundamental questions about the nature of knowledge and reality.
He was a master of taking on those big questions.
He was, but I'm also getting the sense that his work wasn't just about these abstract problems.
Right.
It sounds like he was also trying to understand the underlying structure of reality itself.
You're exactly right.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, and in fact, that desire to analyze and really get at the bottom of things led him to develop this fascinating theory called logical atomism.
Logical atomism. Okay, I'm suddenly having flashbacks to chemistry class.
I know,
Are we going to talk about atoms and molecules?
not exactly, although there are some interesting parallels there.
Okay,
So, logical atomism is basically the idea that the world is made up of these simple, indivisible facts,
okay.
much like matter is made up of atoms.
So instead of physical atoms, we
Yeah.
have like these logical atoms of facts.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that.
And just as physical atoms can combine to make molecules, these logical atoms can combine to make more complex facts.
Okay, so like a simple fact might be the sky is blue.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can build up more complex facts from there.
Yeah, that's the basic idea.
Okay, so how do we know that these logical atoms even exist?
That's a great question.
Can we experience them directly like we can with the sense data?
That's where things get a little tricky.
Okay,
Russell believed that these logical atoms were like the ultimate building blocks of reality,
okay.
but he didn't think that we could observe them directly.
So they're kind of like theoretical particles in physics.
Yeah, exactly.
We can't see them directly, but we kind of infer their existence
Mm-hmm.
based on how things behave.
That's a perfect analogy.
Okay,
And just like in physics, there was a lot of debate about the nature of these logical atoms
Right.
and how they relate to the world of experience.
so logical atomism was more of a theoretical framework
It was.
than an actual description of reality.
Yeah, it was an attempt to give a really rigorous and systematic account of the world.
Okay,
He wanted to clarify the relationship between our thoughts, our language, and the world around us
I see.
in a way that was really clear and precise.
So it's like he was striving for a grand unified theory of everything.
He's a very ambitious thinker.
Yeah.
And while logical atomism might not have given all the answers,
Right.
it had a profound impact on 20th century philosophy.
It's incredible how he was able to use logic to explore these really big questions
It is.
about the nature of knowledge and reality.
Yeah, he was fearless in tackling those fundamental questions.
He was, but I'm also curious about how these abstract ideas connected to his activism
Okay,
and his efforts to change the world.
sure.
Was there like a link between his philosophical work and his social and political views?
Oh, absolutely. Russell didn't see a hard separation between those realms at all.
I see.
He really believed that a clear understanding of the world, which he thought we could get through logic and reason,
Mm-hmm.
could help us create a more just and equitable society.
That's a really powerful idea.
It is.
That logic isn't just for academics.
Right.
But it can actually be like a force for positive change in the world.
Yeah, for Russell, knowledge and action went hand in hand.
Okay, so how did this belief play out in his life?
Well, he dedicated his life to showing that connection.
Hmm.
He used his platform to advocate for peace,
Right?
to challenge traditional morality,
Yeah.
and to fight for the world where reason and compassion were more important than ignorance and prejudice.
He sounds like a true champion of reason,
He was.
like a rebel who used logic as his weapon of choice.
I love that description. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And his legacy is still inspiring us today
It is.
to think critically and act courageously in the face of injustice.
That's pretty inspiring.
It is.
I'm definitely feeling inspired right now.
Good.
I mean, we've gone through his views on knowledge, logic, even the structure of
It's
reality.
been quite a journey.
It has. What other fascinating things can we glean from his work?
Well, we've touched on this a bit indirectly, but to really understand Russell's philosophy, I think we need to explore his concept of power.
Power, that sounds pretty loaded.
It is. It's a complex topic.
I'm ready to hear how he tackled it.
Okay, great. Okay, so when Russell talked about power, he wasn't just talking about like political control or economic dominance.
Okay,
It was a much broader idea for him,
I see.
like this fundamental force that kind of shapes human interactions at every level.
So he saw it as something more primal
Yeah,
and like more pervasive than just those traditional forms of power we usually think about.
exactly.
Okay, so what was his perspective on it then?
He believed that the desire for power,
Okay.
this drive to kind of control and influence others,
Mm-hmm.
is really deeply rooted in human nature.
Okay.
And he saw it as like a motivating factor behind everything,
Wow.
from personal relationships to family dynamics to social movements, international conflicts, you name it.
So the power struggles that we see playing out on a global scale are basically just like magnified versions of the power dynamics that exist in our everyday lives.
Precisely. And Russell thought that understanding this basic drive for power was super important for explaining all sorts of things.
Like what?
Well, like the causes of war and conflict,
Mm-hmm.
but also things like the pursuit of happiness and fulfillment.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this idea of power might connect a lot of his different ideas.
Yeah, it's a key concept in his thinking.
But how did he actually break down this idea of power?
Right.
Did he see it as like one big monolithic force, or were there different types of power at play?
That's a great question. And in his book, Power, A New Social Analysis,
Okay.
Russell actually identifies several different forms of power,
Okay.
each with its own kind of unique characteristics.
Interesting. Like what?
Well, he talks about political power, obviously, but also economic power, social power, even the power that comes from knowledge and expertise.
So like a scientist who makes some groundbreaking discovery,
Yeah,
or an artist who creates a masterpiece.
exactly.
They're wielding a form of power in Russell's view.
They are. They're shaping how we understand the world.
Okay.
They're influencing our thoughts, our emotions, our actions.
Interesting.
Even a charismatic leader who inspires a mass movement, that's a form of power too.
Right.
Even if they don't have any official political position.
So it's like power is this invisible current that's constantly flowing through society,
It is.
shaping our interactions, our institutions, even our beliefs.
Yeah, it's a very powerful force.
Did Russell see this power as inherently good or bad?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Russell believed that power itself is actually neutral.
Okay.
It's like a tool that can be used for good or for evil,
Right.
depending on the intentions of the person who's using it.
So it's not about eliminating power altogether.
No.
It's about making sure it's used responsibly
Exactly.
and for the benefit of everyone.
That was his core belief.
Okay, and he recognized that there were dangers with power, right?
Oh, absolutely. He knew that unchecked power could corrupt people
Right.
and lead to all sorts of oppression and exploitation.
So how did he think we could kind of achieve this balance with power?
Well, Russell was a huge advocate for democracy,
Okay.
not just as a form of government,
Mhm.
but as a way of life.
Okay.
He saw democracy as a way to distribute power more evenly
I see.
and to make sure that everyone has a say in decisions that affect their lives.
So his activism, his critiques of war and religion and traditional morality,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't just about those specific issues.
Right.
It was about changing how power works in society more fundamentally.
Exactly. That's a brilliant insight.
It sounds like that was really the core of Russell's vision.
It was. He wanted to create a world
Yeah,
where power is used to help people flourish,
right.
not to keep some people down and cause suffering.
Wow, that's a powerful legacy.
It is, and what's maybe most inspiring about Russell
Yeah,
is that he never gave up hope.
really.
Even when he was facing war and oppression and the threat of nuclear war,
Right.
he still believed that reason and compassion could win out in the end.
He wasn't naive to the world's problems,
No, not at all.
but he really thought that we could solve them,
Yeah.
that humans had the potential to create a better future.
He did, and he thought that better future had to be based on knowledge,
Right.
reason, and a strong commitment to justice and equality.
That's a very hopeful perspective.
It is, and it's one that we still need today.
I agree. I feel incredibly inspired after this deep dive.
That's great to hear.
I mean, Bertrand Russell's life and work show us that one person really can make a difference.
Yeah, they really do.
If they dedicate themselves to those big goals,
Absolutely.
truth, justice, a better world.
That's the power of Russell's legacy.
It is. He reminds us that clear thinking and courageous action can really change things.
For the better.
It's been amazing to explore his ideas with you.
It's been my pleasure.
I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of his work now.
I'm glad to hear that.
His contributions to philosophy, logic, and social justice.
He really left his mark on the world.
He did. And before we go,
Yeah.
is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with?
I do. Russell once said, "The fundamental cause of the trouble is that in the modern world, the stupid are cocksure while the intelligent are full of doubt."
That is a thought-provoking quote.
Isn't it?
It really makes you think.
It does.
I mean, what if more people embraced critical thinking
Right.
and intellectual humility?
What a different world it would be.
It really would.
So the next time you're facing a tough problem or a tricky situation,
Mm-hmm.
I want you to channel your inner Bertrand Russell.
Okay.
Ask those tough questions.
Right.
Challenge assumptions.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to stand up for what you believe in.
Even if it means going against the grain.
Exactly.
Well said. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Bertrand Russell.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep thinking deeply and diving deeper.